The scream cut through the terminal like glass shattering. Not loud, not hysterical, controlled. The kind of scream that makes people freeze because it means something has already gone wrong. A security officer's hand flew to his belt. A rolling suitcase tipped over. Somewhere, a child started crying and then stopped just as suddenly, as if the room itself had inhaled and refused to exhale. The woman stood alone near the boarding podium, a paper boarding pass torn cleanly in half dangling from her fingers. Not shaking, not pleading, just standing there, shoulders square, chin lifted a fraction too high for someone everyone had already decided was guilty. She wore a dark jacket with frayed cuffs and flat shoes scuffed at the toes. Her hair was pulled back tight, practical, forgettable, the kind of woman people looked through instead of at. Until that moment.
"You can't do that," the gate supervisor said, voice pitched too calm, the way people speak when they're trying to keep a lid on panic. His name badge read Eric Nolan, late 40s, divorced twice. A man who believed rules were shields if you hid behind them long enough. He held up his palm like a stop sign. "Ma'am, you need to lower your voice." She hadn't raised it. "I didn't touch her," the woman said. Her voice was steady, almost quiet, but it carried. "She grabbed my arm, hard. I told her to let go." Across from her, Evelyn Parker dabbed at her eyes with a silk scarf that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Early 50s, immaculate blonde bob, pearl earrings that caught the fluorescent light. She leaned into the young airline agent beside her, voice trembling on cue. She was aggressive. I felt threatened. People like that shouldn't be allowed past security. People like that. The words hung in the air, sour and familiar. Alyssa Carter felt the weight of every stare settle onto her skin. She could almost map them. The curious ones, the judgmental ones, the relieved ones, grateful it wasn't them under the spotlight. She noticed details the way she always did when pressure closed in. The hum of the ventilation, the sharp smell of burnt coffee, the security camera above the gate blinking red, steady as a heartbeat. She exhaled slowly through her nose. The airline agent, a kid barely out of college with nervous hands and a forced smile, kept glancing between the two women, like a referee who'd lost control of the game. "Ms. Parker is a priority traveler," he said, as if that explained everything. "We're just trying to keep things moving." Moving. Always moving. Over people, through people, past them. Alyssa looked down at the torn boarding pass. Her name was printed there in clean black letters, now split down the middle like a verdict. She folded the pieces once, neatly, and slid them into her pocket, a small, deliberate gesture. Her pulse didn't show in her hands. It never did. "I was checked in," she said. "Cleared, scanned, assigned. Your system let me through every gate until she decided she wanted what I had." Evelyn Parker let out a brittle laugh. "Please, don't make this about that. I've been flying this route for decades. I know when something isn't right." She didn't belong. Everyone could see it. A murmur rippled through the crowd, agreement disguised as discomfort. The security officer finally stepped forward. Tall, broad. His badge read Thomas Green, mid-30s, new ring on his finger. He assessed Alyssa the way he'd been trained to, eyes quick, professional, already cataloguing her as a problem that needed resolving. "Ma'am," he said, firm but not unkind, "I'm going to need you to step aside with me." "On what grounds?" Alyssa asked. "For causing a disturbance." She almost smiled. Almost. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him. "You watched her grab me," she said. "You heard her accuse me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move. Explain the disturbance." Green hesitated. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He glanced back at Eric Nolan, who gave the smallest nod. The kind of nod that said, "Do your job. Don't complicate things." Evelyn Parker straightened,
confidence flooding back in. "I have a connection in Dallas," she said loudly, making sure everyone heard. "I'm already late. This is unacceptable. If the airline can't handle basic security, I'll be making calls." Calls. The real threat. Alyssa felt it then, not anger. Something colder. Something that settled deep in her chest and spread outward, slow and deliberate. She thought of the message vibrating unanswered in her coat pocket, the missed call she hadn't taken.
The reason she was on this flight in the first place, under this name, wearing these clothes, carrying nothing that hinted at the weight of what waited on the other side of the country. Not yet. "Ma'am," Green said again, closer now. His voice dropped. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." Alyssa met his eyes. She saw the calculation there, the choice between procedure and convenience, between fairness and speed. She'd seen it 1,000 times in different rooms, different cities, different suits. The pattern never changed, only the setting did. "Hard for who?" she asked quietly. The question landed heavier than a shout. Behind them, the boarding door chimed. Final call. The screen above the gate flashed red. Somewhere, a pilot checked his watch. Somewhere else, a decision was being made without her. Eric Nolan cleared his throat. "Ms. Carter," he said, finally using her name, though it sounded like an afterthought. "We can rebook you on a later flight. Coach." There's no need for this to escalate. Coach. Like a concession. Like mercy. Alyssa's gaze drifted past him, through the glass windows to the plane waiting on the tarmac. Steel and white. Engines still. Doors open. A machine built on systems and protocols, and the illusion that everyone was treated the same once they stepped inside. She felt the familiar tightening at the base of her spine. The moment before things tipped. The moment where silence stopped being passive and became something else entirely. "No," she said. One word. Flat. Final. Evelyn Parker scoffed. "Unbelievable. See, this is exactly what I mean." Green shifted his weight. His hand hovered near his radio. Eric Nolan's jaw clenched. The young agent swallowed hard. Alyssa reached into her coat pocket slowly, deliberately, every movement measured. Green stiffened. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them." She stopped, looked at him. Then, just as slowly, she pulled out her phone and held it up between two fingers. The screen lit her face in pale blue. No shaking, no hesitation. "I'm making a call," she said. "You can stop me, or you can listen." Eric Nolan opened his mouth to protest. The phone connected before he could speak. Alyssa turned slightly, angling her body away from the crowd, but not enough to hide. Her voice dropped, calm and precise. "This is Carter," she said. "Yes, I'm at gate C-17. No, don't pull records yet. Just stay on the line." Evelyn Parker rolled her eyes. "This is absurd." Alyssa looked back at her then, really looked, and for the first time, something flickered across Evelyn's face. Not fear, not yet, but uncertainty. The faint, unsettling sense that the room had shifted, and she hadn't noticed when. Alyssa ended the call, slipped the phone back into her pocket. She turned to the gate, to the officer, to the supervisor, to the watching crowd. "Boarding hasn't closed," she said, "and this conversation isn't over." The engines outside began to whine, low and rising, a sound like something waking up. And somewhere deep beneath the noise, a different kind of countdown had begun. The jet bridge door stayed open longer than it should have. A thin draft of cold air crept into the gate area, carrying the sharp scent of fuel and rain. People shifted, shoes scuffed. A man in a windbreaker muttered that he was going to miss his connection. The countdown on the screen pulsed red, steady and impatient, like it had a pulse of its own.
Eric Nolan wiped his palms on his slacks. He hated moments like this. The ones that didn't resolve quickly, the ones that drew eyes. He could feel the gate slipping out of his control. "Ms. Carter," he said again, louder this time, authority stretched thin. "This plane needs to depart. We're already behind." Alyssa didn't move. She watched the jet bridge operator through the glass, a man in a yellow vest with tired eyes who had paused mid-step, waiting for instruction that hadn't come. The engine's whine rose another notch. She felt it in her chest, a vibration that matched her heartbeat. Evelyn Parker leaned in toward Eric, her voice sharp and intimate, meant only for him. "This is ridiculous. I fly this airline all the time. You're letting her hold everyone hostage." Hostage. Another word chosen carefully, loaded and thrown. Green shifted closer to Alyssa, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, last chance. Step aside with me and we can sort this out away from the gate. Away from witnesses. Away from cameras. Away from timing." Alyssa turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. "If I step aside," she said, "you'll board her and close the door." Green didn't answer. His silence did it for him. Behind them, the young agent's phone buzzed. He glanced down, eyes widening, then quickly locked the screen as if it might burn him. He leaned toward Eric, whispering. Eric's jaw tightened. He shook his head once, sharp and dismissive. "No," Eric said. "We're not doing this here." Alyssa heard it anyway. Not the words, the fear behind them. She took a slow breath and stepped forward, just enough to put herself squarely between the podium and the jet bridge entrance. The movement was subtle but deliberate, the kind that changed the geometry of a room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even Evelyn Parker fell quiet. "You don't want this to be here," Alyssa said calmly. "Neither do I, but you forced it." Evelyn scoffed, breaking the tension. "Forced it? Please, you're making a scene." Alyssa didn't look at her. "I was grabbed," she said. "I was accused. My boarding pass was destroyed. All in front of cameras. If you think this disappears because you put me on a later flight, you're wrong." Eric felt the heat rise in his neck. "Are you threatening the airline?" "No," Alyssa said. "I'm explaining consequences." The word consequences landed differently. It always did. A radio crackled at Green's shoulder. He glanced down, listening, then looked back up, confusion creasing his brow. "They're asking for you," he said to Eric. "Operations." Eric hesitated, then snatched the radio. He turned his back, pacing a few steps away, his voice low but strained. Alyssa caught fragments. "Holding. Clearance. Don't escalate." Evelyn Parker folded her arms, nails tapping against her sleeve. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "This is what happens when you cater to everyone." Alyssa finally faced her. "No," she said softly. "This is what happens when you don't." For a moment, Evelyn looked genuinely startled. Not offended, not angry. Startled, as if the script had changed without warning. The jet bridge operator raised his hands in a helpless shrug. The engines outside dipped, then steadied. The door stayed open. Eric turned back, face pale. "We're pausing boarding," he said, temporarily. A ripple went through the crowd. Groans, complaints, phones lifted higher. "Pausing for what?" Evelyn snapped. Eric avoided her eyes. "For review." Alyssa felt the shift then. Small, but unmistakable. The balance tipping. Not in her favor yet, but no longer stacked entirely against her. Green stepped back half a pace. The young agent swallowed and straightened, as if remembering his training. Somewhere above them, the security camera clicked, adjusting its angle. Minutes stretched. The kind that feel longer because everyone knows they're being watched. A man in a navy blazer approached from the concourse, moving fast, his badge swinging against his chest. late 40s, silver at the temples. His name read Thomas Hale, Operations Manager. He took in the scene in one sweep, eyes sharp, calculating. "What's going on?" Hale asked. Eric started talking all at once. "Priority passenger, disturbance, connection risk." Hale held up a hand. "You," he said, pointing to Alyssa. "Your name?" "Alyssa Carter." Hale nodded once, filing it away. "And you," he said to Evelyn. Evelyn lifted her chin. "Evelyn Parker. And this has been handled very poorly." Hale glanced at Green, then at the torn boarding pass pieces visible in Alyssa's pocket. He exhaled slowly. "Let's step into the office," he said. "All of you." Evelyn opened her mouth to protest. "Now," Hale added, not looking at her. The office was small and glass-walled, tucked beside the gate like an afterthought. Everyone could see in. That was intentional, Alyssa noted it. Hale wanted witnesses, too. The door closed with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. "What exactly happened?" Hale asked. Evelyn spoke first, voice smooth, rehearsed. "Threatened, aggressive, safety concern." Alyssa listened without interruption. When it was her turn, she spoke plainly. "The grab, the accusation." The destruction of her boarding pass. No embellishment, no emotion. Just facts. Hale's gaze flicked between them. He turned to Eric. "Is there footage?" Eric hesitated. "There should be." "Pull it." Eric's phone buzzed again. This time he answered. His face drained of color as he listened. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, I understand." He hung up and looked at Hale. "Corporate wants this handled carefully." Hale studied him. "Why?" Eric swallowed. "They didn't say." Alyssa felt a faint smile tug at the corner of her mouth. Not triumph. Recognition. Evelyn noticed it. "What is that supposed to mean?" she snapped, suddenly sharp. Alyssa met her gaze. "It means," she said, "this is bigger than your seat." The footage loaded on Hale's tablet. He watched in silence. Green leaned in. Eric hovered. Evelyn crossed her arms tighter, impatience creeping into her eyes. Hale replayed a moment, paused, zoomed. The grab. Clear. Undeniable. He looked up at Evelyn. "You put your hands on her." Evelyn laughed, brittle. "I barely touched her." Hale didn't smile. "That's not what this shows." Silence fell heavy in the small room. Hale straightened. "Miss Carter," he said, voice measured. "Your boarding pass was destroyed by another passenger. That's on us. We'll reissue it." Evelyn's eyes widened. "You can't be serious." Hale turned to her. "And you," he said, "will wait." "For what?" Evelyn demanded. "For me to finish," Hale replied. Alyssa felt it again, that cold calm spreading. The room had shifted further, not because of who she was, because of what was now undeniable. Outside the office, the engines hummed, waiting, and Alyssa knew with quiet certainty that the real delay hadn't even begun. The door to the glass office didn't open right away. Hale stood there longer than necessary, tablet in his hand, eyes unfocused, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. Outside, the gate area simmered. A woman argued into her phone. A man paced with his jacket slung over his arm. The departure screen still glowed red, pulsing like a warning. Evelyn Parker broke first. "This is absurd," she said, voice sharp enough to cut. "I have places to be. You've seen the video, she's fine. Let's end this." Hale didn't look at her. "You put your hands on another passenger," he said. "That alone is enough to keep you off this flight." Evelyn laughed, too loudly. "You're joking." "I'm not." The word landed heavy. Eric Nolan felt it in his gut. This was slipping. He could feel it. "Tom," he said carefully, "we don't want to overcorrect here. She's a long-standing customer." Hale finally turned. "And Ms. Carter was a cleared passenger whose document was destroyed at this gate," he said, "in front of cameras, by another passenger. That's not an overcorrection. That's a failure." Alyssa stood quietly near the glass wall, hands folded loosely in front of her. She watched the reflections in the glass more than the people themselves. Evelyn's rigid posture, Eric's tight mouth, Green's shifting stance caught between roles. Hale's jaw, set but not rigid. He was weighing something. The radio at Hale's hip crackled again. He glanced down, then stepped a half-pace away, voice low. Alyssa caught only pieces. Legal. Exposure. Timing. When he returned, his expression had changed. Not softer, sharper, more resolved. "Miss Parker," Hale said, "you will not be boarding this flight." Evelyn's face flushed a deep, angry red. "You can't do that. I have status. I have—" "You assaulted another passenger," Hale said, "and you attempted to misuse security procedures to remove her. That's enough." Eric felt sweat bead at his hairline. "Tom, corporate hasn't approved," Hale cut him off with a look. "Corporate approved review. I reviewed." Evelyn's gaze snapped to Alyssa, pure fury now. "You planned this." Alyssa met her eyes, calm, steady. "You grabbed me," she said. "That's not a plan. That's a choice." For a moment, Evelyn looked like she might explode. Then something colder slid into her expression. Calculation. "You think you've won," she said softly. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." Alyssa didn't respond. She didn't need to. Hale turned to Green. "Escort Miss Parker back to the concourse," he said. "She'll be rebooked later." Green hesitated, then nodded. "Ma'am," he said to Evelyn. "This way." Evelyn yanked her scarf free, eyes blazing as she stormed out of the office. The glass door swung shut behind her with a sharp click. Outside, heads turned, phones lifted higher. Silence followed, the kind that buzzed. Hale exhaled slowly and turned to Alyssa. "We'll reprint your boarding pass," he said. "I'm sorry for what happened." Alyssa inclined her head slightly. "Thank you." Eric swallowed. "We'll need a moment," he said, already reaching for his phone. "No," Hale said. "We'll need transparency." Eric froze. "What?" "You paused boarding without cause," Hale said. "You allowed a document to be destroyed. You allowed an accusation to stand without verification. That doesn't disappear because we fixed it now." Eric felt the floor tilt beneath him. "Tom, this is an operational issue." "This is a liability issue," Hale corrected. Alyssa watched Eric's composure crack, just enough to show the man underneath. Not malicious, just afraid. Afraid of the wrong people. Afraid of consequences that never seemed to apply to the right ones. Hale opened the door. The gate noise rushed back in. The crowd leaned in, hungry for resolution. "Boarding will resume," Hale announced. "Delayed departure due to security review. Thank you for your patience." Groans, applause, confusion. The young agent hurried to the printer, hands shaking. He slid a fresh boarding pass across the podium to Alyssa. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, not meeting her eyes. She took it. "Thank you." As she stepped toward the jet bridge, Eric spoke again, desperation creeping in. "Mrs. Carter," he said, forcing a smile. "We'd like to offer you compensation for the inconvenience." Alyssa paused, turned. The movement was small, but it drew every eye. "I don't need compensation," she said. I need accountability. Eric's smile faltered. She walked down the jet bridge alone. The metal tunnel hummed beneath her feet. Each step echoed. She felt the eyes on her back, the unspoken reassessment. People recalculating what they thought they'd seen. At the aircraft door, a flight attendant stood frozen, professional smile stretched thin. "Welcome aboard," she said. Alyssa nodded and stepped inside. The cabin smelled of recycled air and leather. Overhead bins snapped shut. A man in a suit glanced up, then looked away too quickly. A woman across the aisle watched Alyssa with open curiosity, her phone held low but recording. Alyssa found her seat. Window. She stowed her bag, settled in, and buckled the belt with a practiced motion. Her heart rate barely changed. Outwardly, she looked like any other passenger. Inside, she was counting. The engines powered down. A delay. The plane didn't push back. She felt the vibrations stop. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once. Then again. She didn't take it out right away. She watched the aisle instead. The flight attendant whispering urgently into a handset. The captain stepping out of the cockpit, brow furrowed. Murmurs spread. A ripple of unease. Finally, Alyssa pulled out her phone and glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls. 1 text. It read, "We need to talk. Now." She didn't reply. The captain's voice came over the intercom, too calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. Please remain seated." Brief. The word felt wrong. Alyssa leaned her head back and closed her eyes for half a second. Not to rest, to listen. She felt the plane differently now. The systems, the rhythm, the dependence on timing and authority and trust. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she answered. "Yes," she said quietly. The voice on the other end didn't waste time. "They know your name," it said, "not who you are, but they're asking questions." Alyssa opened her eyes. The cabin lights reflected in the window, her own face faintly visible. Calm, unremarkable. "Let them ask," she said. "We're already past that." There was a pause. This could get messy. Alyssa's gaze drifted to the aisle, where a flight attendant stood frozen, eyes wide. To the cockpit door, still open. To the cabin full of people who had no idea what they were sitting inside. "It already is," Alyssa said. She ended the call. Outside, the jet bridge reattached with a heavy thud that vibrated through the cabin. A sound that did not belong at this stage. Heads snapped up. Conversations died. Alyssa sat very still. Whatever this was about to become, it was no longer just about a seat. The jet bridge slammed back into place with a hollow boom that rippled through the cabin, like a warning shot. A few passengers gasped. Someone laughed nervously. The captain froze mid-step in the aisle, one hand still braced against the cockpit door. That sound was not procedural. That sound meant someone on the ground had pulled authority out of the air. The cabin lights flickered once, twice, then steadied at a harsher brightness. The ambient hum shifted pitch. Alyssa felt it immediately. A subtle wrongness in the vibration beneath her feet, like a heartbeat that had skipped. She opened her eyes fully and sat forward, attention sharpening. "What's happening?" a man in the row ahead whispered to no one in particular. The flight attendant nearest the cockpit pressed her hand to her earpiece, lips parted, color draining from her face. "Captain," she said quietly, "operations is calling again." The captain turned, jaw tight. "Tell them I'm already delayed," he snapped, then caught himself. He took a breath, smoothed his expression, and turned back to the cabin. "Lady and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are resolving a ground issue." Ground issue. The phrase landed wrong, too vague, too careful. Alyssa's phone vibrated against her palm. She didn't look at it yet. She watched instead as the cockpit door closed, slower than before, as if someone were thinking twice. Across the aisle, the woman with the recording phone lowered it slightly, eyes darting between Alyssa and the front of the plane. Suspicion crept into her expression. Not accusation. Curiosity. The moment when people realize a story might be larger than they thought. The intercom crackled again, this time not with the captain's voice, but a different tone altogether. Tighter. Controlled. "Flight crew," a voice said. "Do not initiate pushback. Repeat, do not initiate pushback." A murmur surged through the cabin, louder now. Someone stood, then sat back down when a flight attendant gestured sharply. The engines remained silent. Alyssa finally looked at her phone. Another text. One line. They are escalating without knowing why. She typed back 2 words. Let them. She slid the phone into her pocket and crossed her legs, posture relaxed, almost casual. To anyone watching, she looked like a passenger resigned to delay. Inside, her mind moved fast, mapping possibilities. This wasn't a random hold. This was a freeze. Someone had touched a control they shouldn't have. The cockpit door opened again. The captain stepped out, followed by the first officer, both wearing expressions that didn't belong on men trained to project certainty. The captain cleared his throat and picked up the intercom handset again. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice measured but tight. "We've been instructed to pause boarding operations. This is not a safety concern. We appreciate your patience." Not a safety concern. Another lie meant to keep panic contained. Alyssa watched his eyes flick briefly down the aisle, past the first few rows, toward her seat. Just a glance. Quick. Unintentional. Enough. The flight attendant who had greeted Alyssa at the door earlier hurried down the aisle toward her now, stopping just short of her row. She crouched slightly, lowering her voice. "Miss Carter," she said, "may I speak with you for a moment?" Alyssa looked up at her, expression neutral. "Here is fine." The attendant swallowed. "Operations is asking if you would be willing to step off the aircraft temporarily." There it was. The reflex. Remove the variable. Restore the illusion of order. Alyssa didn't raise her voice. She didn't even change her tone. "On what basis?" The attendant hesitated. "There's confusion." Alyssa nodded slowly. "Then you should clear it." "With all due respect," the attendant said, her composure cracking just enough to reveal fear. "This is above my pay grade." Alyssa's gaze softened a fraction. Not sympathy, recognition. "Then you should be careful who you escalate it to." The attendant blinked. "Excuse me?" Before Alyssa could answer, the cockpit door opened again, harder this time. Thomas Hale stepped into the cabin, followed by 2 men Alyssa had not seen before. Both wore dark jackets with no visible insignia. Both moved with the quiet confidence of people used to being obeyed without explanation. The noise in the cabin dropped instantly. Hale scanned the rows, then walked straight toward Alyssa's seat. Every step drew eyes. Phones lifted, breath held. "Ms. Carter," Hale said quietly, stopping beside her. "We need to talk. Off the aircraft." Alyssa looked up at him. She studied his face, the tension at the corners of his mouth, the faint sheen of sweat along his hairline. He was no longer managing an incident. He was managing fallout. She stood. The movement was unhurried, but it shifted the air around them. Conversations died completely now. The 2 men in dark jackets flanked her without touching her. As they walked toward the door, Alyssa felt the weight of attention press in. She met a few gazes as she passed. Confusion, suspicion, a flicker of doubt. The story was changing shape in real time. The Jet Bridge office felt smaller than before, tighter. The glass walls offered no privacy, only containment. Hale shut the door and turned to face her. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. Alyssa met his eyes. I defended myself. Hale shook his head. After that, I asked for accountability. The two men stood back, silent. One of them checked his watch. Hale ran a hand over his face. Corporate security flagged your name, he said. Not for anything illegal. For associations. Alyssa tilted her head. Be specific. Hale hesitated. They're asking why someone with your travel profile is booked under that fare code. Why your itinerary routes through certain hubs. Why legal requested a hold before we even filed the incident report. Alyssa let the silence stretch. Let him hear himself say it out loud. You assumed, she said, that the problem was me.
Hale exhaled sharply. I assumed this was a customer dispute that got out of hand. And now, Alyssa said, you're realizing it isn't. One of the men in dark jackets spoke for the first time. Ms. Carter, he said evenly, we need to verify your identity. Alyssa didn't flinch. You already did. Twice. Today. This is different. She studied him, then reached into her pocket. Slowly. Deliberately. She pulled out her phone and unlocked it, turning the screen toward Hale, not the others. You want to know why operations froze this aircraft? She said quietly. It's because someone at this gate tried to bury a report that should have been logged immediately. Hale's eyes flicked to the screen. His face changed. Not shock. Understanding. You didn't escalate, he said slowly. You exposed. Alyssa nodded. And now your system is reacting the only way it knows how. By stopping everything until it knows where the damage is. The man with the watch shifted his weight. This aircraft is part of a larger network, he said. Freezing it has implications. Alyssa's gaze hardened. So does letting abuse pass because it's inconvenient. Hale looked at her for a long moment. Then he straightened. We need to move you, he said. Not off the flight. Away from the public eye. Alyssa considered him. That depends. On what? On whether you're trying to protect the airline, she said, or protect the truth. The words settled heavily in the small room. Outside the glass, the jet bridge remained locked in place. The plane sat idle, a suspended decision made of metal and fuel, and people who had no idea how close they were to becoming collateral. Hale finally nodded once. Come with me, he said. We're done pretending this is small. Alyssa stepped forward. Behind them, unseen by most of the terminal, the first official report was time-stamped, filed, and flagged. And somewhere much higher up the chain, a red indicator switched on, marking a situation that could no longer be quietly resolved. They moved her through a service corridor most passengers never knew existed, a narrow passage lined with grey panels and fluorescent lights that hummed just a little too loudly. The sounds of the terminal faded behind them, replaced by the hollow echo of footsteps and the distant whine of machinery. This was the airport's bloodstream, unseen but essential, carrying problems away from public view. Hale walked ahead, shoulders tense. The two men in dark jackets flanked Alyssa without touching her, close enough to guide, far enough to avoid the optics of restraint. She noticed everything. The way one of them favored his left knee, the way the other never took his eyes off her hands. Professionals, not local. That alone told her how far this had already traveled. They entered a small conference room tucked behind operations. No windows. A long table, scarred with old coffee rings. A muted screen on the wall, displaying flight statuses in endless rows of green and yellow. Hale closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, as if bracing himself. This is where it stops being theoretical, he said. Alyssa set her bag down and remained standing. It stopped being theoretical when your gate supervisor decided convenience mattered more than procedure.
Hale winced, but didn't argue. Corporate compliance is on the line, he said. Legal is asking questions they don't usually ask unless something has already gone sideways. One of the men stepped forward. We need to understand your involvement. Alyssa looked at him. In what? In whatever triggered a ground response, he said. You didn't file a report. You didn't make a formal complaint, yet the system reacted. Alyssa folded her arms. Your system reacted because it was designed to, she said, not because of me. The other man exchanged a glance with Hale.
Explain. Alyssa took a breath, slow and measured. When a cleared passenger is physically confronted at a secured gate, and that incident is not logged immediately, it creates a discrepancy, especially when that passenger's travel profile intersects with flagged oversight pathways. Hale stared at her. You speak like someone who knows our internal thresholds. I speak like someone who's had to learn them, Alyssa said, because systems fail people long before they fail audits. Silence pressed in. The screen on the wall refreshed, a quiet flicker that felt louder than it was. The man with the watch cleared his throat. Your profile, he said, is unusual. Alyssa almost smiled. That's one word for it. Your travel history shows repeated last-minute bookings, he continued. Multiple carriers, mixed fare classes. No loyalty footprint that matches your clearance level. Alyssa met his gaze. You're describing intent. He hesitated. What intent? To observe, she said, without the performance. Hale pushed off the door and moved to the table. Who are you? He asked quietly. The question hung there, heavy and inevitable. Alyssa didn't answer right away. She looked at the screen instead, at the stalled flight numbers, at the ripple effect of one decision spreading outward. People stranded, crews waiting, schedules bending under pressure. This was what power looked like before anyone admitted it existed. I'm someone who knows, she said finally, that when a system protects the loudest voice, it teaches everyone else to shout or disappear. That's not an answer, the man said. It's the only one that matters right now. Hale rubbed his temples. We're under directive, he said. Until this is resolved, that aircraft doesn't move. And what does resolved look like to you? Alyssa asked. Hale exhaled. Clarity. Alyssa reached into her bag and pulled out a slim folder, plain, unmarked. She placed it on the table but didn't open it. Then start there. Hale hesitated, then slid it toward himself. Inside were printed emails. Internal, time-stamped. A chain between gate operations, customer relations, and legal. Language softened. Incidents reframed. Words like miscommunication and isolated event repeated like a lullaby meant to soothe liability. Hale's jaw tightened as he read. This was today. Yes. And you already had this? Yes. One of the men leaned in. How? Alyssa met his eyes. Because when people believe you don't belong, they stop guarding their doors. The room felt smaller, closer. Hale closed the folder. This doesn't just implicate the gate, he said. This suggests pattern. It is a pattern, Alyssa said. And it's older than today. The man with the watch straightened. We need to escalate. Hale nodded slowly. I know. Alyssa felt the shift again. The moment where control moved from reaction to strategy. Before you do, she said, understand this. The woman you removed from the flight won't be the end of it. Hale looked up. Evelyn Parker? Alyssa nodded. She didn't act alone. People like that rarely do. The second man frowned.
You're suggesting coordination. I'm suggesting comfort, Alyssa said. She expected the system to bend, because it has before. Hale stared at the screen again, at the stalled flight. If we move forward, he said, this becomes public. It already is, Alyssa said. You just haven't caught up yet. As if on cue, Hale's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then turned the screen toward the others. A headline had begun circulating. Vague, speculative. Passenger dispute causes major delay at international hub. Video pending. The man with the watch cursed under his breath. Alyssa remained still. This is the moment, she said. You can frame it, or it will frame you. Hale looked at her, something like respect creeping into his expression, despite himself. You're not afraid.
Alyssa considered the question. I am, she said, just not of this. A knock came at the door, sharp, insistent. Hale opened it to find a woman in a tailored suit, hair pulled back tight, eyes sharp with urgency. Legal wants an update, she said. Now. Hale nodded and gestured for her to enter. This is Ms. Carter. The lawyer's gaze flicked to Alyssa, assessing. We need to know how exposed we are. Alyssa met her eyes. That depends on how honest you're willing to be. The lawyer's lips thinned. That's not reassuring. It's accurate. Outside, unseen by any of them, the aircraft sat idle, engines cold, passengers restless. A delay that had begun as an inconvenience had hardened into something else entirely. A line had been crossed, and systems that thrived on quiet compliance were being forced into the light. Alyssa folded her hands on the table and leaned forward slightly. You wanted clarity, she said. Here it is. Today wasn't an anomaly. It was a symptom. And if you try to suppress it, the infection spreads. The lawyer glanced at Hale. Hale nodded once, decision settling into place. We're escalating, he said. Alyssa straightened, a faint tension easing from her shoulders. Not relief, readiness. Somewhere above them, unseen but very much awake, the next level of authority took notice. The conference room phone rang once, sharp and abrupt, then fell silent as Hale reached out and put it on speaker without asking permission. He didn't bother to announce who was in the room. At this point, secrecy was already an illusion. This is corporate oversight, a voice said, clipped and bloodless. We understand there has been an operational disruption tied to a passenger incident. Hale glanced at Alyssa before responding. Yes, he said, and it's more than a passenger incident. A pause, a breath, the faint sound of paper shifting on the other end. Explain. Hale did, succinctly. The confrontation, the destroyed boarding pass, the delayed reporting, the internal emails, the attempted quiet fix. He didn't dramatize. He didn't soften. When he finished, the room felt heavier, as if the air itself had been asked to stay put. Another pause, longer this time. And the passenger, the voice said. What is her status now? Alyssa answered before Hale could. Still booked, still cleared, still waiting. Silence stretched again, brittle at the edges. Who authorized the ground hold? I did, Hale said. You exceeded your scope. I acted within policy, Hale replied. The policy that says unresolved security discrepancies suspend movement. The line went quiet. When the voice returned, it carried a different tone. Less authority, more calculation. Ms. Carter, it said, you seem unusually informed. Alyssa leaned back in her chair. You'd be surprised how much you learn when you stop assuming people will explain themselves to you. Another silence. Then, softer.
What do you want? Alyssa didn't answer right away. She looked at the flight status screen instead, the unmoving rows. I want the report logged as it happened, she said, not sanitized, not reframed. I want the gate supervisor's decision trail preserved. I want the footage released internally, unedited. And I want the passenger who assaulted me flagged, not accommodated. That's extensive, the voice said. It's proportional, Alyssa replied. Hale watched the exchange closely. He could feel the center of gravity shifting, could sense the moment when this stopped being about appeasing risk and started being about containing it. And after that, the voice asked. Alyssa's gaze hardened. After that, you let the plane go. A beat. You're asking us to expose ourselves. I'm asking you to stop hiding, Alyssa said. There's a difference. The call ended without a farewell. The lawyer in the tailored suit let out a breath she'd been holding. That could have gone worse. It's not over, Alyssa said. Hale nodded. They'll stall. They always do. Minutes passed. Phones buzzed. Messages stacked. The screen refreshed again, a flicker of yellow spreading to neighboring flights. The ripple was widening. Hale's phone lit up with a new message. He read it, then looked up sharply. They're sending someone. Who? The lawyer asked. Internal review, Hale said. Senior. Alyssa stood. Good. They moved again, this time to a larger room overlooking the tarmac through thick glass. The aircraft sat there, inert, a line of ground crew standing idle nearby. A symbol now. People were filming it from the windows. Stories were forming. The door opened and a woman stepped in. Tall, composed, hair silvered at the temples. Her badge read Margaret Klein. She didn't waste time on greetings. Ms. Carter, she said, eyes sharp. I understand you've created quite a situation. Alyssa met her gaze evenly. I responded to one. Margaret studied her for a long moment. You understand the cost of this delay? Yes. And you're comfortable with it? I'm comfortable with accountability, Alyssa said. Cost is your metric, not mine. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. You're forcing our hand. Alyssa nodded. That's usually how change starts. Margaret turned to Hale. I want the footage, she said. Now. It played on the screen. No commentary, no spin. Just the moment. The grab, the accusation, the tear of paper. The pause where intervention should have happened, and didn't. Margaret didn't look away. When it ended, she exhaled slowly. Who made the call to de-escalate? Eric Nolan's name appeared on the screen in bold text. Margaret closed her eyes briefly. Of course. Alyssa watched her carefully. This isn't about one man. Margaret opened her eyes. No, she said quietly. It's about what he felt entitled to do. And why, Alyssa added. Margaret looked back at her. You're pushing for systemic change from a single incident. I'm exposing a system through a single incident, Alyssa said. There's a difference. Outside, a tug rolled past the grounded plane. The engines remained silent. Margaret turned to Hale. Log everything, she said. No edits, no delays. Release internally. And flag the passenger. Hale nodded, relief and dread mixing on his face. Margaret looked back at Alyssa. This will not make you popular. Alyssa allowed herself a small, humorless smile. I didn't come to be liked. Margaret's gaze sharpened. Then why did you come? Alyssa looked out at the plane, at the people inside who trusted a system they rarely saw. To see if the machine could tell the difference between noise and harm. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded once. Boarding will resume, she said. under review. Alyssa felt the tension ease slightly. Not release, just shift. The door to the room opened, and a staffer hurried in. "They're asking about the video," he said. "It's spreading."
Margaret sighed. Of course it is. Alyssa picked up her bag. Then you should be honest. Margaret studied her, something like reluctant respect flickering across her face. You still haven't told us who you are. Alyssa paused at the door. You don't need to know that, she said. You just need to know what happens when you don't look away. She stepped back into the corridor, the hum of the airport swelling around her. The aircraft doors reopened. Ground crew moved. The machine began to breathe again. As Alyssa walked toward the jet bridge once more, she felt eyes on her from every direction. Not suspicion now. Recognition. Something had shifted. Not enough. Not yet. But it was moving. And once systems started moving, they were much harder to stop. The cabin felt different when Alyssa stepped back inside. Not calmer, not safer, sharper. Like a room after an argument where everyone pretends it's over, but no one forgets what was said. The air carried the faint tang of fuel again, engines stirring back to life, and beneath it, a current of attention that followed her down the aisle without a sound. She didn't rush. She never rushed. Her shoes struck the floor in a measured rhythm, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. A man in the aisle seat pulled his knees in to give her space. A woman 2 rows back lowered her phone, but didn't stop recording. Alyssa registered it all and gave none of it permission to matter. She sat, buckled in, placed her bag beneath the seat. Her hands were steady, her pulse slow. Inside, the tempo continued to rise. The intercom chimed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for departure," the captain said, voice smoother now. Rehearsed confidence layered over strain. "Thank you for your patience." Patience. The word felt thin. Alyssa looked out the window. The jet bridge peeled away, slow and reluctant, like something being dragged from the plane's side. Ground crew signaled. The engines deepened, a low growl that vibrated through the seat into her spine. She felt it settle there, familiar and grounding. Her phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't answer. Not yet. The plane began to move, slowly, deliberately, as if testing whether it was allowed to. Across the aisle, the woman who had been filming leaned toward her seatmate and whispered something. He nodded without taking his eyes off Alyssa. Not hostility. Curiosity edged with caution. People sensed gravity before they understood it. The flight attendant returned to her jump seat, posture too straight, smile too fixed. Her gaze flicked toward Alyssa and away again. Fear, maybe. Or relief. Or the discomfort of realizing you'd misjudged someone and didn't know how to recalibrate. The plane paused again at the end of the taxiway. Alyssa felt it immediately. A subtle hesitation. The kind that didn't belong. Her phone buzzed again. This time she pulled it out and answered without lifting it to her ear. "Yes," she said softly. "They're not done," the voice said on the other end, low, urgent. "Internal review signed off, but executive risk is pushing back." Alyssa's eyes stayed on the window. Of course they are. They're asking for your identity confirmation at a higher level. Alyssa exhaled slowly. They can ask. You understand what that triggers? Yes. The engines idled. A line of planes waited ahead of them, nose to tail, each one a commitment deferred. Alyssa ended the call and slid the phone back into her pocket. The captain's voice returned, tighter now. We're awaiting final clearance. Final. Another word that lied by omission. The woman across the aisle finally spoke. "Excuse me," she said, voice tentative. Are we okay?" Alyssa turned her head slightly, meeting the woman's eyes. Late 60s, careful hair,
a wedding band worn thin. Someone who had lived long enough to recognize when something was off. "We're safe," Alyssa said. "But someone is deciding how honest they want to be." The woman frowned, then nodded slowly, as if that made sense in a way she didn't want it to. The plane lurched forward again. This time it didn't stop. As they climbed, the city fell away beneath a blanket of cloud. The cabin settled into the familiar rhythm of ascent. Seatbelt signs hummed. A few people exhaled in relief. Alyssa did not. Her phone vibrated again. A call, this time. She glanced at the screen. "Unknown number." She answered. "Ms. Carter," a man said, voice smooth, practiced. "This is Victor Lang from Executive Risk." Alyssa closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. "I was expecting you." "We'd like to resolve this efficiently," Lang said. "There are concerns about your actions today." Alyssa leaned her head back against the seat. "You're concerned because a system reacted the way it was designed to?"
"We're concerned because it reacted publicly."
"Then you're concerned about optics," Alyssa said, "not harm." A pause. "You understand the scale of the disruption?" "Yes." "And you're comfortable with it?" Alyssa opened her eyes and stared at the ceiling. "I'm comfortable with the truth." Lang's tone cooled. "You've put us in a difficult position." "You were already there," Alyssa replied. "You just didn't know it yet." Another pause. Longer. "You could have handled this differently." Alyssa's gaze drifted to the aisle, where the flight attendant moved stiffly, every motion careful. "So could you," she said. Lang sighed softly. "Who are you?" There it was. Not curiosity, not respect. Fear dressed as protocol. Alyssa didn't answer immediately. She listened instead to the hum of the cabin, the quiet murmur of passengers settling in, the illusion of normalcy rebuilding itself around them. She thought of the gate, the grab, the torn paper. The moment everyone had decided what she was before she spoke. "I'm someone," she said finally, "who doesn't confuse inconvenience with injustice." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you get." Lang's voice hardened. "You realize this conversation is being documented?" "I hope so," Alyssa said. "So is mine." The line went dead. Alyssa lowered the phone. Around her, the cabin continued its slow return to routine. A beverage cart rattled. A child laughed somewhere behind her. The plane leveled off, piercing through the last of the clouds into open sky. Only then did Alyssa feel it. The shift from ground tension to airborne isolation. No exits. No interruptions. No pretending something could be handled later. This was the part most people misunderstood. Power didn't roar on the ground. It recalculated in the air. Her phone buzzed again. A message this time, from the same contact as before. "They're convening an emergency review. Full scope. They're nervous." Alyssa typed back, "Good." She set the phone down on the tray table, screen dark. Reflections of the cabin lights shimmered across it like distant stars. Across the aisle, the woman watched her again. This time with something like trust. Alyssa gave her a small nod. Not reassurance, just acknowledgement. Human to human. The captain's voice came over the intercom one last time. "We've reached cruising altitude." Alyssa closed her eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations settle, letting the altitude do what it always did. Strip away illusions. Make everything smaller and more fragile. Somewhere on the ground, people were scrambling to control a narrative that had already slipped. Somewhere else, a report was being read by someone who understood exactly what it meant. Alyssa opened her eyes. This wasn't the climax. It was the crossing. And once crossed, there was no going back. The cabin lights dimmed to their night setting. A soft amber meant to coax rest, but no one slept. The plane cruised steady,
a sealed world suspended between jurisdictions, and Alyssa felt the familiar narrowing that came with altitude. Not claustrophobia. Focus. When the ground fell away, so did the noise. What remained was intent. Her phone lay dark on the tray table. She watched the reflection of her own eyes in the screen, steady and unblinking, while the aircraft hummed around her like a living thing. A flight attendant passed, offering water. Alyssa declined with a polite shake of her head. The attendant lingered a half-second longer than necessary, then moved on, uncertainty trailing her like a shadow. Somewhere behind her, a man laughed too loudly at something on his tablet. Somewhere ahead, a woman whispered a prayer. Alyssa catalogued the sounds without attachment. The rhythm of the cabin told her when people were afraid. This was the quiet kind, the kind that came when no one knew who was in charge. Her phone vibrated. She didn't look at it right away. She waited until the vibration stopped, then picked it up and unlocked the screen. It was a message, not from the voice she'd spoken to earlier, but from a different contact, a name that had not appeared on her phone in months. "We need your confirmation. Secure channel. Now." Alyssa's thumb hovered, then typed a single word. "Ready." The reply came instantly. "Stand by." She slid the phone back into her pocket and leaned her head against the seat, eyes open. Outside the window, the sky had turned a deep, endless blue, the sun a memory somewhere beyond the curve of the earth. The horizon looked like a line drawn with intent, clean, unforgiving. Across the aisle, the older woman shifted, then leaned toward Alyssa again. "You work in government," she whispered, more statement than question. Alyssa turned slightly. "No." "Law," the woman tried. "No." The woman studied her face, then nodded slowly. "Then you're trouble." Alyssa allowed a small, honest smile. Only for systems that mistake silence for consent. The woman leaned back, lips pressed together, a flicker of something like relief crossing her features. She pulled a blanket up around her shoulders and closed her eyes, trusting something she couldn't name. The seatbelt sign chimed softly, then went dark. The plane settled deeper into its route. Alyssa's phone vibrated again. This time she answered without speaking. A different voice came through, lower, more precise. "We're initiating a parallel review," it said. "Not corporate, not regulatory." Alyssa straightened slightly. "Good. You understand the implications?" "Yes." "You will need to confirm authority." Alyssa closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. This was the edge. The moment where observation became intervention, where anonymity began to fracture. "I will," she said, "when it matters." A pause. "It already does." Alyssa opened her eyes. "Then you should already know the answer." Silence stretched. Then, quietly, "Stand by." The call ended. The cabin felt smaller after that, as if the walls had moved a few inches closer. Alyssa breathed slowly, deliberately, keeping her pulse steady. She thought of the gate again, of the first decision, the casual certainty with which someone had decided she was expendable. The beverage cart rattled past again. The flight attendant's hands shook this time, just barely. She glanced at Alyssa, then away, then back again. "Miss Carter," she said softly, "is everything okay?" Alyssa met her eyes. "It will be." The attendant swallowed and nodded, moving on. Behind the practiced smile, fear. Not of Alyssa, of consequences, of being caught between orders and reality. The cabin lights flickered once, just a blink, enough to make heads lift. The captain's voice did not come over the intercom. That was wrong. At this stage, there should have been a routine update, a reassurance. Silence meant coordination was happening elsewhere.
Alyssa felt it then, a subtle shift in pressure that had nothing to do with altitude, the kind that came when authority changed hands without ceremony. Her phone buzzed again. A new message, this one marked urgent. They're convening now, executive level. You are the variable. Alyssa typed back. Then let's stop pretending otherwise. Seconds passed, then minutes. The plane cut through the sky, indifferent to the human recalculations unfolding inside it. A man 2 rows ahead stood abruptly, then sat back down when a flight attendant gestured sharply. Sorry, he muttered. Just needed the restroom. The attendant smiled too tightly. We'll be through turbulence shortly. There was no turbulence. Alyssa watched the aisle, the way people avoided looking at the cockpit door now, as if ignoring it could make whatever was happening inside less real. She had seen this before. In boardrooms, in crisis centers, in rooms where decisions were made and blamed on weather. Her phone rang again. A call. Video this time. She accepted. The screen filled with a conference room, faces arranged in a grid, men and women in tailored suits, expressions carefully neutral. At the center, a man Alyssa recognized instantly, though she had never met him in person. Grey hair, immaculate posture, eyes that had learned long ago how to look through people. Ms. Carter, he said, thank you for joining. Alyssa kept her voice level. You called. We did, he said, because a commercial flight is currently airborne under conditions that raise concern. Alyssa glanced around the cabin, then back at the screen. The concern didn't begin in the air. Be that as it may, the man said, you forced a convergence of oversight mechanisms that are inconvenient. Alyssa leaned back. Truth often is. A murmur rippled through the grid. Some faces tightened. Others leaned closer to their screens. You've remained intentionally opaque, the man continued. We need clarity. Alyssa studied him. About what? About you. There it was again, the insistence. The belief that naming something granted control over it. Alyssa didn't answer right away. She let the silence stretch, let them feel the absence of the leverage they thought they had. You're trying to assess risk, she said finally. But you're asking the wrong question. And what is the right one? The man asked. Not who I am, Alyssa said. But what breaks if you ignore me? The grid went still. You're speaking in riddles, one of the women snapped. No, Alyssa replied. I'm speaking in systems. The man at the center raised a hand, silencing the others. You have 10 seconds, he said. Tell us why this aircraft matters. Alyssa's gaze flicked briefly to the window, to the stars scattered like quiet witnesses, then back to the screen. Because it's not the only one, she said. And because what happened at that gate wasn't isolated. It was tolerated. And tolerance scaled. The man's eyes narrowed. That's an accusation. It's an observation, Alyssa said. You can verify it, or you can test it. Silence again. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Alyssa felt the plane adjust course slightly, a gentle bank that pressed her into the seat. Outside, the horizon shifted. Inside, so did the balance. The man finally spoke. We're authorizing a full audit, he said, effective immediately. Alyssa nodded once. Good. And we are requesting, he added, that you disclose your authority. Alyssa inhaled slowly. This was it. The threshold. The place where remaining unseen began to cost more than being known. She looked down at her phone screen, at the waiting faces, at the system that had finally been forced to look at itself. Not yet, she said. The man stiffened. You're refusing. I'm pacing, Alyssa replied. There's a difference. The call ended abruptly. Alyssa lowered the phone. Around her, the cabin remained suspended in its careful quiet.
No one clapped. No one spoke. They felt it, though. The sense that something irreversible had just been set in motion. She closed her eyes, not in exhaustion, but in preparation. Whatever came next would not be gentle. The turbulence never came, but the warning lights did. A soft chime, then the seatbelt signs snapped back on, sharp and insistent. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. A few nervous laughs fluttered and died. Alyssa opened her eyes and felt the shift instantly. Not in the air, but in intention. This was coordination. This was choreography. The captain's voice finally broke the silence. It sounded steadier than it should have. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been asked to adjust our route slightly. Please remain seated. Asked. By whom was the only question that mattered. Alyssa's phone buzzed with a new message, the kind that didn't bother with pleasantries. We are executing containment. Do not disclose yet. She read it once, then again, and let the phone rest face down. Containment was a word systems used when they couldn't agree on a story but knew one was coming. The aisle filled with motion. 2 flight attendants moved in sync, checking belts with unnecessary thoroughness. Their smiles were professional masks stretched tight. One of them paused beside Alyssa, lowered her voice, and said, "We've been instructed to limit movement for a bit." It was phrased as policy. It felt like a request. Alyssa nodded. "That's wise." The attendant blinked, surprised, then nodded back and moved on. Across the aisle, the older woman gripped the armrest, knuckles pale. "This doesn't feel normal," she whispered. "It isn't," Alyssa said, just as quietly. "But it's controlled." The woman searched her face. "Are we in danger?" Alyssa held her gaze. "No. You're in a decision." That didn't comfort her, but it didn't frighten her either. The woman exhaled slowly and leaned back, as if accepting something larger than fear. The plane banked again, subtle but unmistakable. Alyssa felt the weight press into her side. The window showed nothing but darkness now, the stars obscured by a thin veil of cloud. Somewhere below them, borders shifted from one jurisdiction to another. Rules changed without anyone announcing it. Her phone vibrated again. A call. Same secure channel. "They're moving faster than expected," the voice said. "Executive risk is losing ground." "Good," Alyssa replied. "They're proposing a compromise." Alyssa closed her eyes briefly. There is no compromise with reality. They want a statement, something neutral. Alyssa opened her eyes. Neutrality favors whoever already holds power. A pause. They're concerned about exposure. They should be, Alyssa said. Exposure is what happens when you keep things in the dark. Another pause, longer this time. If you disclose now, you accelerate everything. Alyssa's gaze drifted to the cabin, to the people strapped into their seats, trusting a system they rarely questioned, to the flight attendants performing calm while being fed fragments, to the cockpit door, closed and guarded by protocol and pressure. Acceleration isn't always destruction, she said. Sometimes it's the only way to stop bleeding. The line went quiet. When the voice returned, it was lower, stripped of pretense. If you do this, you can't step back. I wasn't planning to, Alyssa said. She ended the call and unlocked her phone, fingers steady. She opened a document she had prepared long before today, its words polished not for drama, but for precision. She read it once more, then tapped send to a distribution list that did not forgive impulsiveness. The effect was not immediate. Systems rarely screamed. They whispered first. The captain's voice returned, this time less composed.
Cabin crew, remain at stations.
The plane leveled off again, engines humming with a slightly different pitch. Alyssa felt the recalibration ripple through the fuselage, like a body adjusting to new instructions. Phones began to buzz around the cabin. Not all at once, a staggered wave. People glanced down, frowned, then looked up at one another. A man in a suit muttered, "That can't be right." A woman gasped softly and covered her mouth. Across the aisle, the older woman's phone shook in her hands. She looked at Alyssa, eyes wide. "It's on the news." Alyssa didn't ask what. She already knew. The headline spread faster than fear. Independent review launched after alleged misconduct at major hub. Internal emails under investigation. Passenger footage corroborated. The words were careful. The implication was not. The flight attendants felt it too. Their movements sharpened. One of them disappeared behind the galley curtain, re-emerging moments later with eyes that had seen something change.
The cockpit door remained closed.
Alyssa's phone rang again. Victor Lang. She answered. "You blindsided us," he said, anger bleeding through control. "I warned you," Alyssa replied. "You released material under review." "I released truth," Alyssa said. "You're the ones who delayed." "This puts us at risk," Lang snapped. Alyssa's voice stayed even. "You were already at risk. You just outsourced it to people you thought wouldn't speak." Silence. Then, quieter. "Who authorized you?" Alyssa leaned back, eyes on the ceiling. "The same thing that authorizes every correction," she said. "Necessity." "That's not how this works." "That's how it always works," Alyssa replied. "You just pretend otherwise." The call ended without resolution. The cabin had shifted fully now. Not panic, awareness. People whispered. Some stared openly at Alyssa. Others avoided looking at her at all, as if proximity implied involvement. The captain's voice came again, stripped of flourish. "Lady and gentlemen, we will be landing earlier than scheduled due to operational requirements." Operational requirements. The phrase carried weight now. Alyssa felt the descent begin, a gentle pull downward. The sky outside lightened, a hint of dawn edging the clouds. She felt the pressure change in her ears, the physical reminder that they were returning to ground, where consequences lived. Her phone buzzed one last time before she put it away. "They are mobilizing. You will be met." Alyssa stood as soon as the seatbelt sign chimed again, not rushing, not hesitating. The movement drew attention like a magnet. The flight attendant hurried over. "Ma'am, please remain seated." Alyssa met her eyes. "We're almost there." The attendant swallowed and nodded, stepping back. The wheels hit the runway with a solid thump that reverberated through the cabin. A few people clapped out of reflex, then stopped when they realized clapping didn't fit this landing. As the plane slowed, Alyssa felt the finality settle in. The air was thicker here. Gravity reclaimed its due. They taxied past gates and hangars, then turned toward a remote stand, far from the terminal. Alyssa noted it without surprise. The engines shut down. Silence rushed in, heavy and absolute. The seatbelt sign remained on. Outside the window, vehicles approached. Not baggage carts, not fuel trucks. Black SUVs. Purposeful, unmarked. The cabin held its breath. Alyssa stood when the door opened, before anyone could tell her not to. The cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. She stepped forward, posture straight, expression unreadable. At the bottom of the stairs, figures waited. Suits, badges not displayed. Authority that didn't need branding. Alyssa descended slowly, each step measured. She didn't look back. This was no longer about a flight. It was about what happened when a system met someone it could not quietly remove. And as her feet touched the tarmac, Alyssa knew the last illusion had finally burned away.
The first thing Alyssa noticed on the tarmac was how quiet it felt without engines. Silence at an airport was unnatural, like a held breath after impact. The SUVs idled in a tight formation, matte black, windows dark. The men and women waiting wore plain suits, shoes polished but scuffed at the edges, people who moved fast and slept little. No one rushed her. That was the point. Power never hurried when it knew it had arrived. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Cold air cut through her jacket. Somewhere behind her, the cabin remained sealed, passengers pressed to windows, trying to understand why their flight had ended here instead of a gate. Alyssa didn't look back. She had already given them what they needed without knowing it. Proof that systems only pretended to be neutral. A woman stepped forward from the line, mid-50s, calm eyes, hair pulled back without vanity.
Ms. Carter, she said. I'm Deputy Director Elaine Moore. You're not under arrest.
I know, Alyssa replied. Elaine nodded as if checking a box. We're going to talk. They walked together across the tarmac, footsteps echoing softly. The others fell in behind them, a loose perimeter. No cuffs, no hands on arms. Respect wasn't granted out of kindness. It was calculated. Inside the SUV, the door shut with a heavy, final sound. The vehicle pulled away smoothly, passing hangars and floodlights, the airport shrinking into a geometry of steel and shadow. Alyssa watched it all without expression. She had spent years understanding how environments shaped behavior. This one was designed to strip spectacle away, leaving only intent. Elaine studied her in the reflection of the glass. You could have waited, she said. Let the review process work. Alyssa kept her eyes forward. The review process works for people who can afford delay. Elaine considered that. You forced exposure.
I forced acknowledgement, Alyssa said. Exposure was already earned.
The SUV slowed and stopped at a secure building near the edge of the field. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and ozone. Screens glowed behind glass walls. Phones rang and were silenced. This was not chaos. It was controlled urgency. They brought Alyssa into a room that felt more like a briefing space than an interrogation. No table separating sides, just chairs arranged in a half circle, as if conversation were expected. Elaine gestured for Alyssa to sit. Alyssa did. A man entered moments later. Tall, lean, late 60s. The kind of presence that quieted rooms without raising his voice. Ms. Carter, he said. I'm Jonathan Reeves. Alyssa nodded once. She knew the name. Everyone who paid attention did. You've created a cascade, Jonathan said, taking a seat across from her. Not just for the airline. For several oversight bodies that prefer to move slower. Slow movement protects abusers, Alyssa said.
Fast movement scares them.
Jonathan watched her closely. You understand what happens next? Yes. You won't be invisible after this. Alyssa met his gaze. I never was. I was just underestimated. Elaine shifted in her chair. There will be consequences, she said. Not just for them. Alyssa didn't hesitate. There already were. They just didn't land on the right people. Jonathan leaned back, folding his hands. You've given us leverage we didn't have, he said. Internal communications, pattern recognition, pressure from outside our usual channels. And, Alyssa added, you've been given a choice. Elaine raised an eyebrow. About what? About whether this becomes a quiet settlement or a public correction, Alyssa said. About whether you protect institutions or people. Jonathan exhaled slowly. You don't make this easy. Alyssa's voice stayed level. Easy is what let it rot. Silence filled the room. Not awkward, considered, decisions forming. Finally, Jonathan stood.
We'll proceed with full transparency, he said. Not because we were forced, but because the alternative is worse. Alyssa rose with him. That's all anyone ever asks for. Not mercy, just honesty. Elaine escorted Alyssa back toward the exit. You'll be released to continue your travel, she said. Another aircraft is being arranged. Alyssa nodded. Thank you. At the door, Elaine paused. For what it's worth, she said quietly. You didn't have to do it this way. Alyssa met her eyes. For what it's worth, she replied. No one ever does, until someone finally does. The ride back to the terminal felt different, lighter. Not because the work was done, but because it had begun. News alerts lit phones, statements were issued, names were removed from systems faster than they'd been added. Somewhere, a gate supervisor packed a desk in silence. Somewhere else, a board convened with fewer smiles. When Alyssa finally boarded the replacement flight, there was no confrontation,
No whispered accusations. The crew greeted her carefully, professionally, as if the air itself had learned restraint. She took her seat, buckled in, and closed her eyes for the first time since the gate. As the plane lifted, she felt the familiar press of ascent, the reminder that gravity was optional if you had enough lift. Outside, the city shrank into abstraction. Inside, something fundamental had shifted. Not victory. Alignment. Alyssa opened her eyes and looked around the cabin. People scrolled. People slept. People trusted. Systems would never be perfect. They would always need friction to remember their purpose. She leaned back, the hum of the engines steady now, and allowed herself a single, quiet thought. True power didn't announce itself. It corrected course and let the world feel the change. If this story resonated, take a moment to like and subscribe, and share your thoughts by commenting these 3 words. Speak truth now.